It's Zach Martin. We're with our special guest, Greg Messel, who has this new novel out about Robert F. Kennedy. And I'm really excited about this book because it's not the usual RFK type of novel in that you wrote a fictional piece. And I was wondering how much fact is part of this fiction in this book, Greg.
I think it's as much fact as I could get. I did a lot of research for this and a lot of reading of other sources. And one of the things that is wonderful now that we can talk about a little bit, there's all of this video available from that you can watch that is very insightful. But what I tried to do is that anybody who, it's all based on actual events that happened, and maybe I took a little liberty with a fictional character to have them have that experience. But there are things that really happened.
Would you say this is more, I don't know if you're familiar with Father Malachi Martin, but he used to write these books about exorcisms in the Catholic Church, and he called them factionals because he would use fictional characters to explain the facts. Is it something that's like that?
It is kind of like that because this book begins when the main character, who is a reporter covering the Robert Kennedy's campaign, is shot. And when he's one of the wounded people when Robert Kennedy is shot. And of course, there were 5 other people who were wounded, some in varying degrees of seriousness. But the way the book starts is that he was following Robert Kennedy through the kitchen pantry, and the next thing he knows, he wakes up in a hospital bed, and he's got some people around him, and he's trying to piece together what happened. Well, how did I get here? And then he finds out that Senator Kennedy had been shot, and so he's trying to piece together the story, but it's all based on fact, and as much fact as I didn't really put anything in there that gets too deep into all the, there's conspiracy theories and there's all kinds of things, but I think kind of the main understanding of the events and what happened.
Well, take us back to before we move as to why you're so interested in RFK and how this book pertains to what's going on currently politically, and maybe some of the other political characters that we're all familiar with in the course of history. Take us back to where you were at the time that RFK was shot at the Ambassador Hotel in California. I think it was a June 5th, and he died the next day on June 6th. I remember I was a little kid, and I was scared because I just heard the news, and I saw the look on my parents' face. Nobody could believe what was going on, and RFK meant a lot to a lot of people. So take us back where you start, being aware, and what made you a fan of Robert Kennedy, those kind of things.
Yeah, 1968, when he was killed, was when I was a senior in high school, and I was lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was a pretty political hotbed at the time, and I would go to Berkeley with my friends a lot, and so we were kind of tuned into we were very interested in the politics, and I went to a lot of those mock political conventions that high school kids went to, and I really fanned the flames of interest for Robert Kennedy, and I just felt like he is the one person who stands out on the field for me, and I felt like he is going to help poor people. He is going to help blacks in the civil rights movement, and and he's going to bring the Vietnam War to an end. And I really believed all those things. So, and so anyway, I was on June 4th. I was very tuned in that he had lost the Oregon primary to Eugene McCarthy, and so he really needed to win the California primary to stay a viable candidate. And I had watched the coverage of that when he was going around the state, and I was watching the California primary. I had a high school final the next day, and I should have been studying for it, but I didn't. I watched every minute of the coverage of the California primary. My parents and younger brother were in bed. I stayed up until I kept telling myself, I've got to go to bed. I've got to go to bed. I'm going to have a final in the morning, first thing in the morning. And besides the fact that it would have been a good idea if I studied for it. But anyway, I watched it, and the returns were slow. Then it finally looked like Bobby Kennedy is going to win. And I was really happy about that. Then they said, he's going to come down and make us a victory speech. Oh, I got to stay for that. So I stayed up for that. And then as soon as he finished his victory speech, and then turned to leave and go off the podium into the kitchen pantry, that's when I said, okay, I've got to turn off the TV and go to bed. And I did. And then I woke up early in the morning to go to that final, and they were talking about President Robert Kennedy's condition. And I thought, his condition? What do you mean his condition? And that's how I found out about the shooting, because it happened moments after I turned off the television. And it was... I think because of the timing of it, there were probably a lot of people, I don't know if you found out that way, that didn't know till the next morning that this had happened.
Yeah, I think I was riding around Asbury Park with my parents in the backseat of the car. I was really young, and I just heard on the radio that Robert F. Kennedy passed away, and my parents looked very upset about it. And I'll just never forget that moment. I can remember where I was. I wasn't as old as you, so my memory of that time was only in the backseat of that car when I found out the information. And I was thinking about this very thing before I talked to you. When you are a witness of history, at what age does it really settle in? And I would say I was a little too young for RFK. But I do remember when Richard Nixon resigned from the presidency, and and I don't know. I just felt bad about the whole situation. I wasn't politically aware, but I said to my grandmother, I'm just a kid, mind you. I don't know anything about politics. I go, Grandma, there's something wrong about this. I just don't like what I'm seeing. And she goes, it's horrible. And then 2020, you always have 2020 hindsight. So. That was my interaction. Now, as I got older, I became more aware, and then I started to dig into history. And one of the first things you learn about, whether it's through history class or on your own, is JFK's assassination. And then soon after, you'll hear about RFK's assassination. And Greg, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out, well, there's two Kennedys within 10 years that have been assassinated. What's the rest of the story? So I don't know how far you go into your book about the rest of the story, but can you spend a little time before we talk about the other parts of this book about what you think actually happened, the cause, or maybe the real characters is Sirhan, a Manchurian candidate. Why doesn't he remember anything of that night? What's your take on the whole assassination of both Kennedys?
Well, I think it is... at the time it happened, I was just brokenhearted, and the guy was old enough where I was really involved and really tuned in to what he was doing. And of course, the Vietnam the whole Vietnam War really hung heavily over me and the people in my high school class and friends I played baseball and basketball with, and so they were people I knew who were getting sent off the war. But I also think as the years have gone by, and there are several things that are troubling about this, it is I think the JFK assassination, you can hear just about anything about that, but I really think it is hard to believe that it just happened the way the Warren Commission said it happened. And then with Robert Kennedy, I don't know how much you have seen the videos and things of his campaigning, especially the last stretch in California. It was just wild. I mean, when you see him, he is in an open convertible, not sitting down like JFK did. He's standing up, and there's his bodyguards, such as they were. I mean, it was Rosie Greer and Rayford Johnson. They're holding on to him for dear life so he doesn't get pulled out of the car. But it's just like a riot mobbing his car. And it is scary when you see that. And you think he is so vulnerable. But the thing that bothers me about that is that I've read multiple accounts of people who were in the campaign who said, what happened after he left the stage? Well, they thought he was going to go through the ballroom. And then I think generally most of them say there was a change suddenly to take him back through the kitchen as a shortcut. And I watched, even Roosevelt Greer said, I don't know, they just told us there was a change. Well, and then there was a change, and Sirhan happened to be in the perfect place at the perfect time with a gun. How did that happen?
Yeah, what are the odds of that? There's no such thing as a coincidence, right? I mean, it seems to me, yeah. So who was the person that made the change is the big question. Who's the one that said, no, we're not going in this direction. We decided to send you over there. And I would say that there's blood on those hands.
Yeah, and then there's people like Paul Schrade, who was United Auto Workers leader, and he had been key to helping RFK win. I was a big supporter of his and a friend of his. And I watched a video just the other day of Paul Schrade. He was walking ahead of Robert Kennedy, and Sirhan fired the first shot, and it hit him, kind of grazed his head at the hairline in the front, and then he immediately went down, and then the other shots were fired. And but he said Sirhan was in front of me, and so the question, a troubling question too, is how did Robert Kennedy his wounds were from the rear,
right?
How did that happen? And I, in the book, I talk about some of the that he was at the time reaching across these steam tables and things in the kitchen to shake hands with the kitchen people. Now, he could have turned his back to where Sirhan was and was shaking hands at the time. That could be one explanation. Or maybe it was a defensive move. If people start shooting, he tried to turn away from him.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also Paul Schrade says he thinks there's more than one shooter. And then Robert Kennedy Jr., recently visited Sirhan in prison and says that he thinks there's more to the story.
Well, your gut feeling is there's more to the story. And if you were to say your main suspect in all of this, who would it be?
Yeah, I would say there's more to the story. Was Sirhan in there firing a gun? Well, yeah, most definitely he was. But and then they have I have in the book one character who was a photographer, like a freelance photographer, and he comes to see Alex Hurley, my main character, at his Associated Press bureau, and says he wants to show him something, and he shows him some pictures he took, but there was a missing roll of film, and that missing roll of film is pictures he took right at the time of the shooting, and maybe even had the shooting on film. But that I kind of just used that to explore briefly that there was apparently a real effort by the LAPD to keep a lid on this. And not launch into a bunch of conspiratorial stuff. And they just said their story is Sirhan fired 8 shots, 3 or 4 of them hit Robert Kennedy and hit other people, and that's the end of that story.
That's our story, and we're sticking with it.
Yeah.
Basically.
but there are you can find stories where there were people who this is kind of what I did with the historical fiction in the book is I read a story about a photographer who really did he had 2 cops kind of strong arm him and took his camera and his film away, and then they said, you can pick this up downtown, and so he goes to pick it up a couple days later, and they gave him his camera and 2 rolls of film, and he said, well, I had 3 rolls of film, and they said, no, that's not what our records show. So I think there was definitely some funny business going on there. I don't know what. So I used that story as this one guy in the book who is saying there's something strange going on here, and so I think there was.
Well, let's talk about the protagonist in this book, Alex Hurley. He is a newspaper reporter. He gets shot. He ends up, I guess, waking up soon after, not knowing exactly what happened. Tell us how you use Alex Hurley in this story and what makes it so interesting as opposed to most of the stories that you could read or the books that you could read about RFK Jr. RFK.
Well, I think Alex Hurley is he's very involved politically and very dedicated to reporting the news, and he's pretty idealistic. And as he covered the Kennedy, well, he went to Vietnam as in 1966, according to his history that I give him, and he covered the Vietnam War, and he was in Vietnam on the ground, and he became very disillusioned at what he saw there, and he found out what we're hearing back home is not what I'm seeing here. And then, so 2 years later, he gets the plum assignment to follow Robert Kennedy around, and he gets to know Robert Kennedy, and he really becomes very enamored with Robert Kennedy, and he addresses the idea through him. There was a real fear at the time when Robert Kennedy was running that some people spoke about it, but others, it was almost like an unspoken thing, like, oh, I hope no one shoots him. I hope this, that doesn't happen. But that was a fear that I think everyone had at least in the back of their minds. And then when it happens and Alex wakes up in a hospital bed, he realized that the worst...
his worst fears came true.
Yeah.
Are you the character Alex Hurley? Is that based on you?
Well, I I mean, he's very intelligent and handsome, and all the women like him. So there are
obviously,
parallels.
yes, it's of course, it's Greg Messel. The book is called. Go ahead.
I think Alex Hurley kind of says what I think. You know, he's me in that regard, and his idealism and the idea. I think everyone who supported Robert Kennedy at the time, especially probably people who are my age or Alex Hurley's age, would say, we thought, hey, things really can be changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he can really make the world a better place, and we can really have peace in Vietnam, and we can really have racial relations that people can live in peace together. I think we really thought that, and then when Robert Kennedy dies, you realize, what do we have now?
Mm-hmm.
What we have now is we have Hubert Humphrey running against Richard Nixon.
Yeah, there was no way Nixon was going to lose to Hubert Humphrey, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the charisma and charm index took a big hit, mm-hmm. for one thing, but this is not somebody who's going to inspire anybody. And I also saw some interviews of young, like college-age volunteers for the Kennedy campaign. And after he died, they were just devastated, and they said, where do we go from here? There's no place to go. You know, we lost hope. And I think that's kind of a theme in the book, that what do people do when they've lost hope? And Alex Hurley lost hope.
Uh-huh.
You know, he just said it doesn't matter now. And but then some things happen which somewhat restores that hope. But the part of the problem with 1968 was there was just unrelenting bad news in 1968.
Yeah,
it was just.
It's Robert Kennedy that is delivering the news about the assassination of Martin Luther King. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Martin Luther King. And then there's other political assassinations and things going awry. As you said, in 68, you had the riots. You know, Greg, when I was thinking about the riots, at one point, I didn't live too far from Newark. And as a little kid, I couldn't help but think that they were after me. These rioters are going to come and get me and kill me. I mean, it was that scary as a little child. I mean, all I heard was news, bad news, and looking at the reaction of my parents. And, you know, as I got older and I started to, I guess, get more interested in history, I started to look at JFK and RFK. We still do this today. We try to diagnose what went wrong or what possibly could have happened. And then we had the release of the CIA documents last year, which gave us all a little bit of insight, and it started pointing fingers at the CIA, the FBI, organized crime, this one and that one. And you realize that there was a massive cover-up, and I think too many of us just accepted whatever the explanation was. And if we were counter to the explanation, we became troublemakers, or we became the crazy ones that everybody would point fingers at. Obviously, JFK did things that upset the apple cart, and RFK followed in his brother's footsteps and was even more pragmatic in many ways and became more of a danger than his brother. So I guess both of them had to go with the structure of government.
I think that's ultimately what happened. And then also, I think one of the things that we all went through, and you're talking about being a child, and I was just thinking I was a teenager at the time, of course, but teenage boys being teenage boys, I remember the day Martin Luther King was assassinated very well. And a bunch of knuckleheads from high school. Me and my friends decided that was just terrible. Hey, let's go to a movie tonight. Okay, where should we go? Well, in Oakland, this is playing. Let's go to Oakland. Who goes to Oakland on the night Martin Luther King was assassinated? And so we came out of the theater and there were burning cars and rioting and,
Not good.
So, but I think one of the themes or one of the transitions we made in 1968, and you have things coming like the Pentagon Papers and all the Watergate things, we believe that, well, the government tells us the truth. Mm-hmm. And our president tells us the truth. And if our president says we need to go to war, then I guess we do, because he would know. And then what we discover is the government doesn't tell you the truth. In fact, they lie, and in fact, they lie most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big thing that I think is really a loss of innocence. And one of the other things that the character Alex Hurley goes through is I structured his family so that there's this conflict built into his family. His dad is a hard-nosed Marine, and they've been a military family, and Alex was the oldest one and broke away from that, and he has longer hair, and he's involved in this more liberal politics, but he has a younger brother who is made in the absolute image of his father, and he says yes sir and yes ma'am to everybody, and has polished shoes and clean cut guy who can't wait till he turns 18 so he can be a Marine and go to Vietnam and do his part. And so this sets up a real conflict between Alex and his father and his brother, and he tries to advise his brother, don't do it.
Right.
But
and so what you've done is you created a real humdinger for people to gravitate towards. It's Robert Kennedy, A Tale for the Age of Trump. What do you mean by A Tale for the Age of Trump?
That he what? That Robert Kennedy did. What was the last part of what you said?
Well, A Tale for the Age of Trump. It's right here in front of me. It says Robert Kennedy, A Tale for the Age of Trump. I was just wondering what that means in relation to the book.
Well, I think that we've had this now truth. There was an article that came out about my book, and it was saying truth. We're calling this the post-truth era, which is a really disturbing title. It doesn't matter what the truth is anymore. And that things are factual, and that's what Alex Hurley discovered when he goes to Vietnam, when he would get the briefing from the military, and then he would go out on the field but he grew up in a house where I'm going to say his father said anytime our military acts, it is on the side of the angels. Mm-hmm. And the world is full of bad guys and good guys, and we are always the good guys.
Right. Well, we all know that's that can't be 100% correct. I would like to think that for most of the time, Greg, we try to do the best thing.
Yeah.
You know, we try to be on the good side, but like everything else, we have that evil streak that goes through humanity. Dreams that never were. This book really gives a really good background and a great storyline about RFK. And if, let's just say, Greg, that the assassination never took place. Let's say that RFK actually did win the White House and was our president probably for 2 terms. What would be different?
Yeah.
What would be different in your mind?
Well, I think there would be a much softer feeling from our government there, and that they're more on our side. And I think I think one of the most poignant things that has ripped your heart out is after Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and this was a spontaneous thing. It wasn't planned. Nobody thought this was going to happen. Is the funeral train that ran from New York to Washington. And when you see the people lined up along those tracks, it's like it's America. It's black and white and brown people. It's poor people. It's cops. It's Boy Scouts. It's, these are all people who felt like Bobby Kennedy spoke for them, and now he's gone. And that is still the group who feels like there's nobody.
There's nobody on our side. There's nobody really on our side.
Yeah. And anything we get accomplished is in spite of our government, And I think also, like you said, I don't mean to, our government in a very tough world, our government is probably the best chance you have, but it's also, I think, one of the things that contributes to all of these problems is a lack of understanding. And, Robert McNamara, there was a great documentary about him where he was reflecting on his life. And, of course, he was in the middle of all that. But he said that we didn't understand what was going on in Vietnam. And it's almost like we didn't want to understand. But and then in the Ken Burns thing of Vietnam, when we finally get ground troops in, LBJ sends ground troops, so all these people landing, and the Vietnamese are going, who are these guys? What are they doing here? And is this the French? This idea that we're going, they need us, and they're like, what are you doing here? So, we just did not understand what was needed. And I think it's a little like helping an old lady across the street who doesn't want to go across the street.
Yeah. Like Felix Unger when he's trying to help that old lady and a Boy Scout belts him in the opening scene of The Odd Couple. You might mean well, but it's not the kind of help that's needed at the time. And one of the things about the Vietnam War, or any war for that matter, there's a lot more going on than the eyes can see. There's a lot hidden from us. There's economics that are part of it, and I'm not talking about our economy, but let's just call them that invisible hand that's behind it, whatever you want to identify that as. But it's also look at the benefit of what happened in Vietnam in an odd way kept us out of World War III, because it became a proxy war, almost like a relief valve on a boiler in which we were going at it with the Russians and the Chinese. That's what was really going on there. And it was far away from our coast, as opposed to Cuba getting embroiled in something over there. And we still do this kind of stuff nowadays. Our enemies have changed a little bit, but I think that our intentions are good, but we don't really think all of this out. And then while it's easy to blame it on this guy, or this group or that group and do the scapegoating, when it comes down to it, Greg, it's about each and every one of us thinking that we have no power in any of this, and we just rely on other people to be active about it or to speak for us instead of, we'll find time to post things on Facebook. We'll find time to argue on Twitter. We'll go off with our friends while having coffee, but very few of us will pick up the phone and call our congressman or leave a message for the president. Well, that's not my president. Like, let me tell you something. We only have one president each and every time. You're not going to always agree with that person 100%. You might not like that person, but I just think you're better off, if you have a problem, go directly to the source. In other words, if you have a problem with President Trump, make it known. Leave a message for him on, call up the White House. Let him know. Write the letter. Same thing with your congressperson. write that person a letter. Let them know where you stand. I mean, they're not mind readers. I mean, if they are, that gives them incredible powers. But we just can't let you get this mindset where it's everybody else's job. And I think RFK, he was about that. He wanted not only to advocate for us, but he also wanted to point out what our individual responsibilities are in the scheme of things. And it came down to this: love thy neighbor, the golden rule. That's what I think.
It absolutely was. And I think of a scene, one of the great scenes from Robert Kennedy's life that I saw. That it was a tape. He's sitting on a curb, and he's talking to two little black kids, and he's saying, "Are you smart?" And the little kids were talking to him, and he goes, "What books are you reading?" And it's like, well, you need to read books. You need to work hard in school. And it's like, when's the last time you saw a politician do something like that? I mean, that's incredible. And
well,
I think one of the
go ahead. In this whole game, Greg, the politicians need an audience. The politicians need somebody to believe in them, so they'll use it whatever's their disposal in their games to gain the power that they're looking for. I think they maybe some of them go in with good intentions, but they come out or after a while they end up like the rest of them. They say all these wonderful things to get elected. I think the difference between a guy like RFK and the regular established politician of our time is RFK really, he lived the way he espoused. It wasn't a hypocritical existence. You can't tell people to do one thing and then do something else. He was against the Vietnam War, but he also realized that now that we're involved, we just can't pull our troops out and leave a vacuum there. That's leaving them worse off than they were before you got there. You created the mess. Now you got to clean it up a little bit. So I think he was really...
and I think people oversimplify that time to say, well, Robert Kennedy would have pulled us out of Vietnam. Well, he would have done what you're suggesting. You can't just say, okay, everybody pack up, let's go. And, it would have happened in a different way, but I think it would have happened much sooner than it did. And when I look at the statistics of the Vietnam War, 1968 was the most deaths of all the years of Vietnam. And you look at all of those that died after 1968, and you think, what were they dying for? How come they had to die? And were we, what are we fighting for, I guess?
I totally understand where you're coming from. I served in the armed forces, in the Army. I was a tank officer. Now I'm in the reserves as a captain chaplain. So, I'm willing to serve if called upon to do so. I'm a little bit old right now and, really out of shape. I saw something in the news that really kind of got me a little upset. And I generally do not get into big political discussions because that's not my forte. But when I saw 4 out of 10 people want socialism in this country, I thought to myself, well, hell, why did I bother serving my country? This is not what I signed up for, not to end up with this socialist kind of leaning to the point where you guys are going crazy. So it's like spitting in the face of everybody before you when you start to nonchalantly go, socialism is the answer. RFK himself would not be a socialist.
No.
I think what we've seen politically is the Republicans and Democrats, even from that era, are nothing like they were back then. They're totally different. And
I agree.
So there's all of these alarms going off, and when you talk about 68 and what are we dying for, I'm thinking to myself at this point, well, what did I serve for, and what are our troops dying for now? Only to come home to saying we don't like the setup, so we want to change it, and the people that want to change it, they're not putting their lives on the line like that. That's disturbing to me as an author.
Well, another thing that I find really disturbing is I've talked to when people who know I write books, say, "So, were you writing a book?" Yes, and what's it about? And I tell them, and they said, "Oh, is that like the about those Dallas conspiracies and stuff?" No, Robert Kennedy, not Jack Kennedy. And when I start talking to people about these things that happened in 1968 and the Vietnam War and Robert Kennedy, it's just really disturbing how ignorant they are of this piece of history. And these are people who ought to be smarter than this. And they, to live in a world that you could be drafted and plucked out of your life and sent to Vietnam. And I saw some statistics that I didn't realize, but the Vietnam War, the people who fought it were very young,
Yeah,
and the biggest casualty rate demographically was the 18 and 19-year-olds, and it's like, wow, 18 and 19, and and that makes sense with people that I knew who I went to school with who just got drafted and they were gone, and next thing you hear, somebody will say, "Oh, did you hear that this person got killed in Vietnam?" And that's the end of your life.
my gosh, the whole thing, Greg, is real tragedy. And it's not just RFK; it's all of those men and women who gave their lives in service of this country, and their dreams that never were. They're 18 and 19. They're just, to me, children. Their dreams that never were. So it's a great name for a book. It's by Sunbreaks Publishing. How many books have you written altogether, Greg?
This is my 11th one. This one will come out on June 6th, which is the anniversary of Robert Kennedy's death. And it's available for pre-purchase on Amazon now, but it'll come out on June 6th.
That's a fantastic book. I'm really looking forward to delving into it and reading it. I think it's really interesting, the fact that you call it fictional, but it's really fractional, just like the Malachi Martin type of motif. I love those kind of books. Those to me are the most interesting to read, because it gets you to, all right, what's really going on? Who is the people that they're really writing about? What's this character? That's what makes reading so much fun. It is. And I made every effort to be as accurate as possible on the facts, and so I'm pretty confident that it's pretty good. Well, I'm sure it's a masterpiece. I'm sure it's going to be one of those top sellers. You couldn't release it at a better date, right? 51 years after the assassination of RFK. Does any of his family members, do you send the book to any of his family members? Have you heard from any of the Kennedys about their feeling about this book?
No, I haven't. I have thought, though, that as this gets wider distribution, when you write this, I really wasn't thinking that the Kennedys will read this, but I've had some. Well, back a couple of years ago, I went to, which kind of what started thinking. I went to Arlington and I went to Robert Kennedy's grave, and I also went to the Vietnam Wall. But just being at Arlington in general is a real emotional punch to see the sacrifice that has been made. But I also went to the Kennedy Library on a recent trip to Boston, and that just made me think a lot about them, and I would like to try to do something with the Kennedy Library. That would be...
Oh, that'd be fantastic,
Yeah, I did find one artifact there at the Kennedy Library, and I bought one of these. And that's another issue of this whole era is this campaign button says, if I were 21, I'd vote for Kennedy. And, that was one of the issues, is we were talking about all these 18 and 19-year-olds dying in Vietnam, but they can't vote.
That's right. Yeah. They changed the Constitution so that they could vote at the age of 18. Hey, Listen, as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
if you can go serve your country and die for your country at 18, you should be able to drink, smoke, and vote. Whatever you want to do. Oh,
Yeah.
well, we're running out of time. Do you have a website that people can find more information about what you're up to and your books?
Yes, I do. It's www.gregmessel.com, and Greg is Greg, and Messel Messel, and I have a lot of everything's there, and I hope that people will check out the website. I think it's has a lot on it, and so I'm excited for this to come out June 6th and to see. There's an exciting part of releasing a book, but I've sort of lived in this. When you're writing a book, you kind of live in this little private world that's your world, and I've lived there for almost 2 years now. Now I have to turn it loose and see what everybody else thinks about it. There's something kind of scary about that.
Well, I'm very excited for you. I'm sure people are going to love it. And thank you very much for taking time to speak about this book. I'm looking forward to reading it. God bless and take care.
Thank you very much for having me.